There are places in the world where the boundary between the known and the unknown is very thin. Places whose natural and wild beauty hide secrets too incredible to be believed, until those secrets begin to reveal themselves. When that happens, people react in wonder, curiosity, and sometimes in horror. Humanity often commemorates these places by creating monuments, such as Stonehenge. Scholars suggest that it was a place from which to observe the heavens, a place of burial, a place of either human sacrifice or healing. The Nazca lines, etched into the earth of southern Peru, carry the qualities of sacred symbolism. The desert Southwest has kept its own disturbing secrets, from the alleged crashes of craft from other worlds to the all-too-real testing of atomic weaponry. Then there's the Bermuda Triangle, a region of the Atlantic Ocean in which hundreds of ships and approximately 75 planes have simply gone missing, along with passengers and crew. Both scientific and supernatural causes have been proposed for these catastrophes, but theories do little to ease the pain of those who lost loved ones in the triangle. There are places in the world whose mysteries call us to come and see for ourselves, whatever the human toll might be. Places like the Chestnut Ridge. The Chestnut Ridge, located in southwestern Pennsylvania, lies on the western edge of the Appalachian Mountain Range. The ridge rises in southern Indiana County and rolls to the southwest by way of towns like Blairsville, Derry, Latrobe, Connellsville, Mount Pleasant, and Uniontown, all the way into West Virginia, where it gradually comes to rest near Morgantown. Villages along the ridge were founded as far back as 1770. The rich limestone clay soil rewarded the efforts of early farmers, and soon the communities could support iron furnaces, whiskey distilleries, and general stores. One family, by the last name of Keck, settled in the area to bottle and sell spring water and soft drinks. They had no way of knowing that their town, Kecksburg, would one day become world famous, but not for ginger ale.
Then I was 16 years old when the incident happened near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. And I got involved with that evening as it was breaking on the news. And I've been out in the field ever since that time investigating UFOs and cryptids and other phenomena here in Pennsylvania. Kecksburg, Pennsylvania is a small rural community in Mount Pleasant Township in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, approximately 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
Like many of the small towns in Westmoreland County, Kecksburg sits within the shadow of the Chestnut Ridge. The ridge is dotted end to end with these tiny villages, many of them founded well over a century ago. Each of them bears their own strange history of sightings and encounters with things not of this world. Many wonder what it is about this particular stretch of land that beckons such mysteries. For decades, researchers of the strange and unknown have journeyed back to the Chestnut Ridge in search of answers. Their quest isn't solely confined to present day. For over a century, mysterious circumstances have shrouded the ridge in a fog of unease.
I've been involved in the paranormal since I've been about 10 years old, and then I got into the field in 1997 investigating cases. My main base of operation in Pennsylvania is the southwestern part of the state, namely this particular area where we're at here. Westmoreland, Fayette County, Armstrong, Indiana, Washington. Probably about 80% of my investigations and cases that I've worked on have been here in the Chestnut Ridge area.
There's been a long history of various phenomena along the Chestnut Ridge, especially along the Westmoreland County side and Derry Township. We have many reports from the small communities such as Derry and New Derry and Hillside and Superior and Brenizer and all throughout that area, and many sightings around the Keystone State Park.
Without a doubt, there's an atmosphere to this area. You can drive these back roads and you just get a weird feeling, some of these places you go into. Some are very dark and secluded. They just give off a really ominous vibe.
Something very strange has been going on along the Chestnut Ridge for many, many years. And in fact, the earliest first-hand account I have of a Bigfoot encounter where I actually interviewed the witness. It goes back to 1931, near Indian Head in Fayette County. And of course, Fayette County is one of those areas that has year after year phenomena being reported.
There are newspaper articles I found that date back to the 1800s, late 1800s, that talk about people experiencing wild men of the forest, or even gorillas or monkeys in this area. It's not just Bigfoot related. There's all kinds of weird phenomena, from UFOs, strange lights in the sky, cryptid creatures, haunted locations. There's just a really concentrated area right here. There's a lot of weird activity that goes on.
There's been a lot of history of all kinds of strange phenomena that's happened all around this area and through Mount Pleasant Township and throughout the community around here.
UFO sightings in this area have been rampant. As I said earlier, it's a very high volume of reports, even all the way up to Kecksburg in the 1960s.
There probably was a time when the residents of Kecksburg felt far removed from the tension of the Cold War and obsession over UFOs. While the televisions, movie theaters, and drive-ins were full of nuclear wars or countered by fantastical aliens and flying saucers, this tiny burg remained blissfully detached from the near hysteria that was gripping other areas of the country. In late 1965, that sense of security would be shattered.
I'll remember it all my life. You know, it's something I'll never forget. That night we was actually out playing football, and we didn't actually know about it until we walked back in the house, and Mom and Dad said that there was a thing on the radio that something crashed in Acme. My mom looked out the window and she seen all the vehicles and stuff on the road. She said, well, this is right behind the house. That ain't in Acme.
I remember that evening just like it was yesterday. It was Thursday evening, December 9th, 1965. I was listening to a radio station in Pittsburgh. There was a breaking news story coming on the radio about this brilliant fireball. This fire object was seen from the tip of Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania.
That night, a radiant fireball was seen streaking through the skies over Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, moving in a southeasterly direction, allegedly dropping hot metal debris over Michigan and northern Ohio before hitting the ground near Kecksburg. All sorts of explanations were proposed. Some thought they were witnessing an airplane accident. Others thought a missile test had gone awry, or that a satellite was re-entering the atmosphere. The most common assumption was that a meteor was the brilliant light in question. None of those, however, seemed to square with what was happening near the Chestnut Ridge. Local witnesses reported feeling the impact of the object's crash landing, seeing a wisp of blue smoke rising from the woods, and some even claimed to discover what it was that had fallen to earth, an object shaped like an acorn, approximately the size of a small car, with hieroglyphic-like writing around its base. The ravine in which it fell quickly became the center of curiosity and controversy.
And it got more exciting during the evening as reports were coming in that the military was now arriving in the Kecksburg area to search for an unidentified flying object.
We started watching out the windows and stuff, and I seen people coming in and out and going down into the hall in the field down to where it was at. And then we started seeing people coming in. We seen cars lining our driveway, people going up and down through the fields, and people coming to the house using they used our house as a command post.
People actually believe that they saw a small military presence within maybe the first hour after the object fell. But it was during the next few hours during the evening that the most of the military began to arrive on the scene. And there were many people throughout this area that reported seeing what looked like a military convoy, military trucks coming in from different roads into the Kecksburg area. So what we learned was the fact that as reports of this object coming down in the Kecksburg area began to circulate on Pittsburgh area radio and TV, hundreds of people descended on the small rural community to try to get a look at the object down in the woods.
An alarming scene was beginning to unfold around the crash site. Residents of Kecksburg claimed that armed soldiers were present and were preventing people from approaching the wooded ravine. In one instance, a witness reported that a member of the military instructed 2 neighborhood boys to deliberately misinform curiosity seekers, and the youngsters gladly complied by giving people false directions to the impact site. Things took a decidedly more serious turn, though, the closer one came to the downed object. A well-known jazz musician from the Pittsburgh area claimed that U.S. soldiers aimed their rifles at him and his friends, ordering them off a country lane, as an Army flatbed truck hauling a tarp-covered, acorn-shaped object made its way out of a field. Others, who were teenagers at the time, reported that the military response left them fearing for their lives.
Some of the local residents who saw this object come down that afternoon, they went down into the wooded ravine to see what had fallen from the sky. And they came across this large metallic acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. There was actually 2 important locations. One was on top of the hill, what is now called Media Road, which is where hundreds of people were jamming the road that night. That's where most of the reporters were. That's where some military, some other authorities were. Far on the opposite side of the woods was an old dirt road, a farm lane, which a number of people found themselves on. That was closer to the crash site, the impact site, and that's where a lot of the military presence and other authorities were on that lane over there.
There was people in black suits that came in, and those there people there, they was actually, seemed like they was in charge of everybody. We seen some people coming down in a white suit carrying a big box. One had a NASA patch on his arm, and they took this box down into where that was at. I seen him go down in with the box. Never seen it come back out, but I seen the truck go down in, and I seen it come back out, you know, with something on it.
There was a lot of talk around this community that people had seen a large military flatbed tractor trailer truck carrying a large tarped object at the area late that night, but that never was in the news.
Next day, me and my brother went down in the woods. We seen where they'd covered up a hole, a different kind of dirt, you know, and seen how trees was broke off, and walked over to the other side of the hill when it was all burnt off. There was some guy over there with a Geiger counter. At the time, we thought it was a treasure finder. We was kids, we didn't know any better. He asked us what we was doing down there. Told him, well, we live here, you know, we're down here all the time. He says, well, you know, there's a chance of radiation being down in here. You know, what the heck's radiation? You know, we didn't know. So we sort of ignored him and went along our way.
So early the next morning, I went to the local newsstand to see if there was any of the stories about what was seen last night in the local papers, and there it was in all the local papers. The Pittsburgh Press, the Post-Gazette, the Greensburg Tribune Review had 2 editions, and the early morning edition had Army ropes off area, unidentified flying object falls near Kecksburg. The later edition of the paper had several different stories, including one that caught my attention, which said, searchers failed to find object. And it went on to say that, yes, there was a search the early morning hours, but they found absolutely nothing, and that the official explanation was that it was people's imagination. They had seen a bright meteor in the sky, but nothing had fallen to the ground. And that's officially where the case remains today.
I can picture it, you know, in my head, you know, the people coming in, people keeping quiet about things, and people I know that was there and seen it and denied it. I'll never forget that. You know, it's something that sticks with you.
Kecksburg, to me, seems like it was almost a catalyst for people becoming comfortable enough to share their experiences, and the newspaper media following these encounters and reporting on them.
The Kecksburg experience turned the eyes of those who lived in the area to the skies over the Chestnut Ridge, and what they saw over and over again was more mysterious than they ever expected. What they saw was unidentified. In the spring of 1966, a woman in Latrobe was awakened from sleep by her dog, which had become highly agitated. Upon taking the dog outside, she saw a silver object hovering no more than 80 feet above the roof of her house. The object looked and spun like a top and was bathed in a reddish glow. After several minutes, the top-like anomaly shot up into the sky and was gone. The witness faced ridicule from her family and friends when she spoke about what she had seen. Later that same year, 2 women were approaching Adamsburg on Route 30 when they noticed a strange aerial craft almost touching a series of high-tension power lines. As they drove closer, the object went under the power lines and began to dive towards their car. Fortunately, there was no collision, and as it flew off, the women observed its dark-colored oblong shape with a type of tail in the back and deep grooves on its surface. The driver of the car, who to that point had been a UFO skeptic, suffered repeated nightmares about the incident. In the months and years to follow, reports like these would become more and more common along the Chestnut Ridge. Eyewitnesses were left to speculate about what they had seen and wonder what normal life was going to be like now that they knew something was out there.
I know what I saw. It stayed with me all these years. I haven't told a lot of people about it. At this point in my life, it happened, and I'm just here to tell you about it. I grew up in Derry on Ridge Avenue. This happened back in, it was either the late fall of '67 or early winter of '68. It was still dark, but daylight was coming. I was sitting at the table in the kitchen when my mother was in the living room. I heard her call, "Tom, come here." When I walked into the living room, we were looking out the picture window in the living room above Chestnut Ridge. Out of the picture window, we saw a circular UFO is what I'm going to call it. Multiple lights spinning around the bottom, red, green, white, orange. It was just strange. It was something that I had never seen or experienced before. And while we're standing there, it was in the one spot, and then all of a sudden it shot across, and you never saw it shooting across, but it was in another position in the sky above the Chestnut Ridge. This went on, I thought, for a lifetime, but it probably wasn't that long. I'm going to say 1 minute to 2 minutes. And we just stood there in amazement. Neither one of us said anything to each other. We just stood there and watched it. All of a sudden, it just shot straight up into the sky. And it wasn't like a sparkler, but there was a trail of red and silver lights that came off the bottom of it, and it just disappeared. I've looked into the sky in the last 50 years looking for something similar to this. I've never witnessed anything like that since then, although I keep looking.
Strange sightings around the Chestnut Ridge have never been limited to the skies. There's a long history of earthbound, bizarre activity, especially on the Westmoreland, Fayette, and Indiana County side of the ridge, with witnesses reporting subterranean sounds, strange lights, black panthers, and unusually large birds. And then there's Bigfoot. Accounts of hair-covered man-apes can be found in Pennsylvania newspapers dating back to the 1800s, and these creatures have never really gone away, re-emerging from time to time in the southwest highlands of the state. In the late 1960s, a young man named Stan Gordon began to actively research the Bigfoot phenomenon. Like many, he was excited by the search for an unknown primate living in the Pennsylvania forest.
So it was my determination to set up a volunteer group of research people to go out to investigate these reports. So that's what I did, and I decided in 1969 to set up my own hotline for the public. So I'm getting calls on haunted houses and ghosts and flying saucers and Bigfoot and strange creatures and weird noises. Anything unusual, the calls were coming in. By 1973, we had expanded to cover the whole state of Pennsylvania. To our surprise, we were beginning to get referrals from the state police and from the news media and other agencies. So when they were getting reports, they would refer the number of my group to investigate the report. And it was very lucky that we are already established, because 1973 comes around and here's this major UFO Bigfoot wave, which nobody could have ever predicted. And we were extremely busy during that time period.
It was fortunate that Stan Gordon had assembled the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group prior to the events of 1973. The volunteer unit would come to include medical professionals, law enforcement officers, pilots, educators, engineers, former military specialists and scientists, and they were united by a desire to gather information as quickly and thoroughly as possible about the odd happenings on the Chestnut Ridge. Researchers like Barry Clark could be dispatched to the scene of a strange occurrence within minutes of it happening, thanks to Gordon's state-of-the-art two-way radio system. The group's fieldwork was conducted as often as their full-time jobs permitted, and many risked their professional reputation by being associated with this pursuit. But with their aptitude for technology and their vast range of vocational expertise, the members of the study group shared a basic optimism that they would eventually uncover the truth about the outlandish sightings that seemed to multiply by the day.
Yeah, Barry Clark, went out to investigate different sightings and events that, for people who saw Bigfoot, UFOs, that type of thing back in the early 70s. Somewhere along the line, I'll bet you if you talk in the Derry area, especially Derry to Latrobe area, you'll talk to somebody who's either friends with, related to, or know somebody that had some kind of an experience.
Of course, 1973, Bigfoot was the big story. There were multiple reports of Bigfoot sightings all along areas of the ridge, especially along the Westmoreland County side and Derry Township.
What's interesting about those reports from the 1970s, 73, 74, some of those reports literally took place a couple miles from where I lived.
An older lady lived kind of, not secluded, but by herself. And the state police were there the night before. I got to go there the next day to talk to her. But she had a little yapping dog. And it was carrying on and carrying on. She looked out, she saw this thing, and the more the dog barked, the more agitated. It literally picked the end of her trailer up on the corner and dropped it. And there's no skirting around it. When I looked the next day, you could see that it was not back in the same position it was.
In the early 70s, the nation was still enthralled by stories of the abominable snowman, but was now even more enamored of his homegrown cousin Bigfoot, whose presence in the Pacific Northwest seemed to be corroborated by a shaky, full-color film obtained by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. But to the shock of all involved, a similar figure, massive, hairy, sometimes leaving large three-toed footprints in its wake, was appearing on farms, along wood lines, and crossing roads throughout Westmoreland and Fayette counties. Most distressing was the creature's fearlessness in approaching civilization, and the damage it sometimes caused.
But as these events of 1973 are coming to our attention, we began to see some unusual patterns. For example, we would have a UFO sighting in a certain area. Within minutes to hours to days later, we would have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then the reports got even stranger. That's when we began to have reports with UFOs and Bigfoot seen together at the same time and place. As reports were unfolding during that time, some of the stranger reports began to come to our attention. One case, September 27, 1973. This was out in an area where two women were waiting for a friend to pick them up. Suddenly they see this huge 7 to 8 foot tall, huge man-like creature with white hair running across the road towards the woods. Strangely enough, in one of its hands, it had a glowing ball of light. It runs off into the woods, and a short time later, this object comes across the sky, projects a beam of light down into the woods where the creature ran into. So these reports were getting very odd. And then we had the case that occurred up in Fayette County. It was the case that convinced me and my team that there was a lot more to Bigfoot than any of us had any idea about.
There were several young men at a farm in Fayette County, not far from here, that in October of 1973 saw a very large light in the sky come down in a farmer's field.
What we found out was that about 9 o'clock that night, about 15 people in that rural community observed this object in the sky. It was only about 100 feet off the ground. It was as big as a barn, it was bright red and like a big ball. It was only about 100 feet up and it was slowly moving down towards the ground.
It was in a pickup truck. We was coming out to my father's farm in Advances Mill. And we turned off the main road up a dark lane that goes up to his farm. As we were going up the lane, I looked to the left and I seen this big orange ball in the sky. And it wasn't no more than maybe 100 feet off the ground. And my wife looked, He was just on. We stopped and then we drove on up to the house. I went in the house. So we all looked off the porch and we watched it. It was just coming down slow. It was making like some kind of humming noise then. My mother and him was there and he was a little bit scared. I said, I'll go down panels and I says, I'll look and see what I can see from down there. So we went down, pulled up in her driveway. I'm looking up on a hill and all I can see is like a glow, reflection off the ground. I'm going to have to go back to my house, I said, and I'll go out in the field and check. So they had twin boys there. Their name was Rick and Nick. It was about from 10 to 12 years old now, right? They said, can we go up with you for the ride? I said, yeah, get in, you know. So they got in the back of my truck. We went up to my dad's house and we parked the truck in front of the house. Got out of the truck, you could hear this like a lawnmower, but it was a real loud whirring noise, like a turbine running or something. And we're standing there listening, and I hear like this distant crying, like a baby crying, you know, a kid yelling, whatever. And it scared me. So my dad had a couple traces there for his .30-06 rifle and some bullets. And don't ask me why I did it, because I put the traces in and I carried the bullets with me up there. And these two twins were standing there with me, and one twin said, there comes something along the fence. And it must have been maybe 100 feet to my right, up a hillside. And I'm looking, and I could see the movement of the thing from the glow of this ball. So when it got within about maybe 50 or 60 feet, maybe 70 feet away from it, I looked at it, and there was this object walking. It was real tall, and it seemed like it was walking real slow, but taking long strides. I mean, in other words, the movement was slow in the body, but the strides looked. And I'm watching it, and here it's following the fence line. And every time it would get to another fence post, it would make this noise. And then I seen why it was making this noise for this thing behind it, another one to come right up behind it. As soon as the second one would get up to it, it would proceed up to another fence post. And this thing when it got directly diagonally from us, this one little twin, he started screaming. I think it was Ricky. He started running. He ran back down to the house. Nicky grabbed my leg. He said, shoot it, shoot it. So I'm standing there, so I shot a tracer over its head, and the tracer flared. And I seen these things, and they was tall. The fence posts that were there were railroad ties. They towered over top of these things. The front one towered over 2 feet, and the second one must have been maybe a foot shorter. I shot that tracer over there, and I just looked at it, and the front one looked at me, and I could just see the glow of its eyes. So I shot the second tracer, same thing. And I mean, when I shot the second tracer, first one reached its hand back, and to my mind, it would be the length of this table, and it touched the other one, and that light went out. The light just completely went out. And they're standing there, and I could see both her eyes looking at me, just like cat eyes, and this little kid screamed. So I put a regular bullet in. Here there was still a glow out there from the ground, like the ground was low, the glow was along the fence, but the big ball had went out. And I shot the first shot, and I remember seeing a piece of that wood just splatter, just come out to the side of it. I put the other two bullets I had underneath the chamber, and I made 3. I shot again, and twice I hit right in it because it sounded just like shooting into a lake or something, just like water plopping. And I hit the thing. They turned around, and they followed that fence. They didn't go towards the light. They followed that fence back. They started moving. We run. We both run.
After he was done shooting at them, they ran back to the truck, went back to the farmhouse, told the family what happened, took them to a neighbor's and called the state police.
And then a state police officer was called in, and he was called in after the fact, after the craft disappeared. He even mentioned how large the area was illuminated. It was a very large area illuminated by this craft or whatever it was, that you could literally sit down and read a newspaper in it, how bright it was. Unfortunately, there were some ramifications that happened to one of the witnesses, where he was walking through the field and there were investigators with him, and all of a sudden, for no reason, he dropped to his knees and apparently having visions of end times, visions of the end of the world, destruction, chaos, and that sort of thing, and it psychologically messed the guy up.
Some of the most bizarre cases on record erupted from the Chestnut Ridge in 1973 and 74. One family was chased from the woods by an aggressive ape-like creature with prominent fangs. A motorist reported hitting a bipedal monster, which vanished at the moment of impact. Another person claimed to shoot a Bigfoot that had been stealing apples from a bushel basket on his porch. In many cases, the unknown figures announced their presence with an unsettling wail that witnesses compared to a crying baby, as well as a distinctive smell like ammonia or sulfur. These things happened with such frequency, especially during the summer months, that Gordon's investigative team sometimes responded to multiple calls on the same night, with local newspapers providing coverage of each disturbance. One location where repeated oddities were reported was the Superior Mobile Home Court. In August of 1973, the police were called to investigate a close-range Bigfoot sighting, and they even located and preserved some unusual tracks for Gordon's team to analyze. For reasons still unknown, this incident attracted some unwanted attention from a peculiar source.
The incident in the trailer court happened on a Friday night. We come home from Westmoreland County Fair, and the whole neighborhood was abuzz. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. They said the woman lived across from me, heard a noise at the back of her trailer, and she opened the door, and Bigfoot was standing there.
The people who lived in that trailer heard like scratching on the end of the trailer. They heard like a baby crying sound from close by. They opened up the back door, and only a few feet away, here's this large, very broad-shouldered, hairy Bigfoot creature standing there. One other witness saw it running between the trailers out of the area.
Everybody scattered, and people were tripping and falling over each other, and the whole neighborhood was shook up.
4 days later, after the incident happened, I get an emergency call from an operator. Well, it happened to be the woman who lived in that trailer who 4 days before had seen the Bigfoot. What she called was, she was very upset. She said, I think maybe I did something wrong. And I said, well, what's that? She said, well, this odd appearing man came to our trailer. He was asking all kind of questions about what we saw that night.
I come home from work, and there's this car sitting there, and it had Ohio government plates on it.
He had some kind of an ID on him about Ohio and UFO, but she didn't pay a lot of attention to it. He had an Ohio license plate on the vehicle, and he wanted to know all about what had happened here.
And there's a footprint in the sand. He's about to take pictures of the footprint, and the boy lived there, the older boy. He went and got his camera.
As time went on that evening, he was going over and looking at the footprints, and I guess there were several local people looking at the tracks there. There was a young boy. He had one of those Polaroid Instamatic cameras.
And he started doing the same, taking a picture, and the government guy said no pictures. Started taking pictures anyway, and he ripped the camera out of his hand. I don't know if he ripped the film out, I don't remember that part. Took the camera. He had just developed a picture, and he said, I just made a picture. And this mystery man, whoever he was, grabs that picture from that little boy's hand, wrinkles up and put it in his pocket and said, you just made a picture for us. And then he went over to the tracks, and with his foot, he destroyed the footprints. And the people were very, very upset over that, started yelling at him and said, we're calling the police. And he ran to his car, and they said he sped out of there so fast he almost turned the car over. That's the last time anybody saw that fellow. We never found out who he was.
The instance at the Superior Mobile Home Court was extremely strange, yet ambiguous enough to resist explanation. It would become far more clear that the United States government had knowledge of the incidents being reported around the Chestnut Ridge and knew who to talk to about them. On September 20th, 1973, Stan Gordon received a phone call from a man who identified himself as a U.S. government official. The caller indicated a strong interest in the Bigfoot sightings taking place in Westmoreland County, and then, to Gordon's surprise, asked that any convincing evidence be sent to a facility in Washington, D.C. The spokesman even provided a mailing address and phone number for what he called the Bureau of Sports Fisheries Bird and Mammals Lab. Less than 2 weeks later, Gordon would be contacted by and would meet with 2 men from the office of Congressman John H. Dent. The visitors wanted to learn more about Gordon's research group and their findings, and were courteous enough that Gordon kept in contact with them while the wave of sightings continued. Later on, Gordon would be stunned to discover that the government may have taken a decidedly more active approach in their information gathering.
So while we're interviewing this witness, back years later, probably in the 1980s, And we bring up the fact we might like to hypnotize him again. And he said, why do you want to hypnotize me again? And he goes on to say that here these two men came to his home to interview him, and he thought they were part of our group. And we said, well, tell us about what happened. He said, well, these two guys come to my home. One's in a dark suit, one is in an Air Force uniform. The one in the Air Force uniform has a briefcase with him. They wanted the witness to tell the story of seeing the UFO and the Bigfoot. And then apparently he was hypnotized, and they told him thank you very much, that they believed what he was telling them, that they would be in touch with him. He never heard from these fellows again.
While Bigfoot seemed to be lumbering through the woods of southwestern Pennsylvania, if eyewitness testimony is to be believed, the skies above the Chestnut Ridge were filled with all manner of lights, craft, and inexplicable shapes flying under their own power. In August of 1973 alone, witnesses reported seeing an hourglass-shaped object, a sphere dropping fiery debris, a circular craft with illuminated windows, a bright orange ball, red, green, and white lights that looked like Christmas tree bulbs, and a boomerang-shaped object all floating through the air.
Another really significant UFO case was September 3rd, 1987. And this was on a major highway, Route 30 near Greensburg. And that evening, numerous witnesses in the air, including law enforcement, they see this huge cylindrical object, metallic, about 300 feet long, only about 300 feet up, with multiple lights on it. I don't recall anybody reporting any sound. It's moving across, coming across Route 30, crossing the old Green Gate Mall, where there was a power substation. So this object is moving horizontally across the sky, and then it turns vertical in the sky, and when it does, all the power in the area goes out for a short time. Behind that mall was an annex where they had movie theaters, and then it was all blacked out. And when the engineers went to examine it, to investigate, they found all three of the master fuses had been blown, something that's apparently unheard of. And they were very interested in what caused those fuses to go that day.
In September of 1973, the aerial activity seemed to intensify over specific locations in Derry Township. At one of these locations, called the Bell Farm, a family and their friends claimed multiple eerie encounters with both UFOs and hairy humanoids. Investigator Barry Clark, a colleague of Stan Gordon, spent a number of nights staking out the Bell Farm, and soon found himself at the center of events that, by his own admission, he found haunting.
Three times we got a call from different people saying that if you looked up in the sky at 10 o'clock in the eastern part of the sky, you would see a real bright, large star just all of a sudden turn on. So the one night I left interviewing one family and I went back out to the farm sometime after 10, we're sitting there maybe 10 minutes after 10, all of a sudden there's this bright star. And we're watching it, and all of a sudden that thing it would turn blood red, and then go back to silver. Turn blood red, go back to silver. And then there were 5 flashes like an arc from a welder, and they were about a second apart, and then there were just multiple small silver objects went to it that looked like bees going to a beehive waiting their turn to go in. But when they got there, they either reflected the red or they turned red. So we stood there and watched it in awe. The guy's wife, she screamed, jumped in her car, she wouldn't come back out. And I said, there's something, it's doing something. And then we realized it was actually coming down, it was getting bigger. And at that point, we all left.
After the incident at the Bell Farm, Barry Clark decided that he was finished with the paranormal. Shaken by what he saw, he never investigated another case. But evidently, the paranormal was not finished with him. After stepping away from the research group, Clark experienced an episode of missing time while making what should have been a short drive between communities on the ridge. This sensation that only a short time has passed, when in fact many hours have elapsed, is most commonly linked to alien abduction scenarios. Clark does not suggest that he was abducted, but neither does he have any answers for what happened to him. Only the disturbing reality of time for which he cannot account, of which he has no memory. And along with that comes the suspicion that when one peers deeply into the darkness, there's actually something looking back.
I've had some things go on through my life after that, and what bothers me is I have a grandson who was born in 1986, and from the time he was like 8, 9, 10 years old, he kept telling us about people that were coming into his bedroom through a hole in his ceiling. Now he has had lapses of time, can't explain, which I've had. I've had incidents where I've lost an hour to an hour and a half. He does it. So I don't know if what I was doing back then triggered something, and then it carried on to my grandson. I don't know how that works. All I know is, and it was about 1975 when these things started. I talked to one other person that was involved back then that said that they were afraid, that they didn't want to, they were telling about seeing things in the mirror when they looked at themselves and incidents like that, but it's quite scary when it happens to yourself. It's nice to read about it by somebody else, but when it's really your life.
I became friends with a guy named Sam Sherry. He lived right in the heart of the Chestnut Ridge up in Ligonier, Pennsylvania, a little town called Wilpin. It was 1986, and he was fishing at a place called Sleepy Hollow. It's a popular spot for fishing, and it's a breezeway or a crossover between Route 30 East and Route 30 West. And one night Sam was out there fishing, and he heard some noise to his left, and looked over to see a figure standing on an embankment a little further down the creek from where he was. And this is Loyal Hannah Creek that he was fishing on. So as he's fishing and doing his thing, he notices this figure's moving closer and closer to him. And he got to the point where it was so close to him that he could make out very good detail of this thing. And as he described it, it's not your typical Bigfoot creature that he saw. It was an upright walking creature that had very sparse hair on its body, almost like it had mange. It appeared to have a mohawk on the top of its head. And this creature was very tall, had long arms hanging down well past its knees. Sam saw this thing walking closer and closer to him, ambling closer, and it kind of unnerved him. So he got in his vehicle to leave, and just before he was able to leave, this creature stopped the vehicle from leaving, put its hands on the driver's side door, stuck its head in the window, and he was literally face to face with this thing. He said this thing actually opened its mouth. He could see there were no teeth in its mouth, or it was missing a lot of teeth. It was pushing down on the car, preventing him from driving away. He hit the horn on his car to scare this thing. This thing stepped back, like, oh my gosh, kind of expression. Sam took off and left. And he said in his taillights as he was driving away, he could see this thing waving at him as he drove off.
Although the Chestnut Ridge has yet to see another outbreak of reports quite like the flap of '73 and '74, unusual sightings have not stopped, and if anything, they've become more bizarre in variety. Otherwise sober-minded individuals profess to have seen enormous dark-colored birds in flight and on the ground, which are sometimes referred to as thunderbirds, as well as black panthers, upright walking canid creatures known as dogmen, winged humanoids, and even a 22-foot-long flying lizard resembling a dragon. In many cases, observers struggle to describe what they have seen because there are no categories that correspond to what they have perceived. All they can do is react to the invasive presence of what appears to be a monster.
But there's all kinds of strange creatures that have been seen. The most recent was the Dogman sighting that took place literally miles down the road from where we're at here in 2015. 4 women were going to a place called Roaring Run Park, and they pulled into a pull-off at the trailhead to get out of the vehicle to start hiking the trail. And as they got out of the vehicle, they started into the trailhead and they noticed a figure walking towards them. The one woman claimed that this thing wasn't a person. It was actually a very tall, muscular, salt and pepper, hair-covered creature that had a large snout like a wolf or a dog, had pointy ears, and had a tail on it. And it was standing upright on two legs, and it just approached them out of the forest. 3 of the 4 women got back in the car. She stood there watching it, and it stood there watching her. And the stare-off went on for several minutes before this thing turned and walked back off into the forest.
There have been many reports over the years of not only Bigfoot sightings, but reports of thunderbirds as huge, generally dark brown or black birds with massive wingspans like a small aircraft.
A thunderbird basically is a large bird with anywhere from 8 to 20 feet in length of wingspan. Some witnesses describe the thunderbird as having black feathers all over its body, while others describe the thunderbird as being having like a reptilian-like membrane skin on its body, almost like a pterodactyl-like thing flying through the sky.
I only ever heard one that that came from a guy that said that he was up in the Dairy Ridge and this large thunderbird, well, name of the thunderbird, this very large bird flew right over top of him.
Yeah, I grew up in Lower Burl. I joined the Army, and then in 2005 I retired. Moved out here to Derry. I just got done cutting my back field. My family was down at Keystone State Park there. I went down to get them to bring them up to show them what the field looked like. I came back up to the field, and I'm looking out there at the end of the field, and it looked like there was a tree stump. So we drove out there to the tree stump. I go, that isn't a tree stump, it's a deer. It looked like a big deer, about this tall, maybe 5.5 feet tall, sitting up on its butt. And it was like this. And I'm getting closer, I'm thinking, that doesn't look like a deer anymore. And it picked up its head, and it was staring at me like this, like it was mad. Huh, so I stopped 50 yards maybe from it, I'm looking at it. That's a bird. It got up, and it took one swipe, and it started coming towards me. I'm like, oh, Judas Priest. Came over top of our bus, and my yard is shaped like a roller coaster. And when it hit that, it came up like that into the air. It was big-chested, just claws like this. If it wanted to, and it swooped down, I'm not saying it's going to pick you up, it'll pick you into pieces and take those pieces away.
Strange events like this go on all across Pennsylvania. And there's certain areas where sometimes you get more activity than others, but the one area, of course, that year after year we seem to get more than normal activity is areas along the Chestnut Ridge. There's been all kind of other anomalies up on the ridge, such as underground sounds and mystery booms and strange lights and people seeing small little lights coming near their homes.
And they appear, very, as I said, very close to the ground or very, very high up in the trees. There's no rhyme, nor reason, nor explanation for the pattern they move or why they move or direction. They move. And it seems almost as if like they're intelligent enough to move so they don't want you to see it. Like you see it over here and you'll be focused over here and then it'll appear over here. And when you look over here, it's gone and it's back over here again.
To this point, that is the biggest event that's happened in my life that I have no understanding of. In August of 2015, myself and a friend of mine, Eric, we were on the West Virginia side near Preston County in a very remote location, about 2 miles off of anywhere would have been near any civilized area.
Well, there's a couple times where I've experienced this, and I don't know what it is. I really don't have an explanation, and I don't think anybody does at this point. We were out doing a Bigfoot investigation in this very active area.
This night was pitch ink dark. I couldn't even see Eric. I couldn't even see my hand. I mean, it was no moon that night. You couldn't see through the canopy of trees, no star, residual light from the stars. So we were in total ink darkness.
And I noticed off in the woods, to my left, probably about 100 yards away, this light. And it first looked like someone just carrying a lantern. If you would swing a lantern as you're walking through the forest, you could see it moving back and forth, rocking.
What appeared to be a light permeating underneath the canopy of trees was moving around very slowly, but erratically at the same time, almost balloon-like, but it didn't, it would stop and then it would move again.
And as more people focused on it, more people started to see this light moving through the trees. And we were trying to figure out where it was emanating from, where it was coming from, if maybe there was somebody over there in the woods with us that night.
As it got a little bit closer, you could see, if you've seen the lava lamps of the 70s, it had this pulsating light change going on inside of the spherical object. I know for a fact it was within 60 feet of us when the next thing happened. Well, I didn't see Eric, he couldn't see me. Well, he has a 500 lumen flashlight. He lit it up with a flashlight. This window opened up in this black darkness. It was a translucent, silvery, almost like it was light projecting out of it. This thing went in, this window shut, and then we're standing there in total darkness again.
I have no idea where it came from. I started talking to other people about it, seeing if they'd seen it, other people that researched up in that area, and little by little, I began to hear people talking about seeing this floating light in that area.
Is there a simple cause for the glowing orbs being detected in the forests of Pennsylvania? Perhaps an atmospheric condition or weather-related anomaly is to blame. Or is there something more than natural generating light in those dark places? What is it about the ridge that seems to produce a parade of the monstrous? Do these creatures crawl forth from the belly of the ridge itself? And what about the strange lights that appear in its skies? Are they terrestrial in origin, somehow generated by the great earthen mound? Do we even know the right questions to ask about this window into the unknown? In this region, mysteries tend to layer one on top of the other.
People, they sort of make the connection between Bigfoot or UFO along with Bigfoot. I am no expert by any means. I think there are power sources in the area, and I think there might be a link to power sources having something to do with this.
I know if you look on the internet, after that I started looking on the internet, what I seen, there's a lot of stuff that goes up on the Chestnut Ridge. Is it strange? Probably it's everywhere. They just don't, pay attention. But density of forest, I'm not sure.
I don't know why this area seems to attract the phenomenon. I really don't, but it seems to be concentrated in the state in this area.
It seems like the mountain areas around here and the West Virginia areas have a lot of strange things happen in them.
Over the years, we saw certain patterns emerging, and we thought, gee, we're getting close to some answers. Then another case will show up that will completely dismiss your thoughts and theories. And you're always hopeful that you're going to finally come to a conclusion. But the more I receive reports, even the last few years, some of the cryptid reports we're getting are so strange and so unusual. They're not even close to the normal Bigfoot or Thunderbirds or Panthers and other anomalies we get reports on. So there's a lot more out there going on that any of us have any answers for. And I think we're dealing with something that's very strange and unusual, and right now beyond our scientific understanding.
Some who have encountered the inexplicable along the Chestnut Ridge have been able to go on with their lives. The occurrence becomes an intriguing footnote in their personal history, nothing more. But for others, the experience has a profound and lasting effect, shifting their worldview, changing their thoughts about what is possible, what is real. Like Sam Sherry, they become obsessed with having just one more encounter to justify what they've been through, to prove it to the skeptics and maybe to themselves that they're not losing grip on reality. Or, like Barry Clark, they would rather not know what happened to them. They'd prefer not to remember, but to forget.
And maybe if I went and had the aggression, maybe I would understand more, but like I said now, I don't know if I want to know any details. I know what's happened, and I've had some physical stuff left behind, but do I really want to know if I did do that? Would it be worse than not knowing? It's kind of a catch-22.
Today, the village of Kecksburg has embraced its enigmatic past, hosting a UFO festival each summer that has attracted thousands of visitors. Families bring children to play in the shadow of the UFO replica, once used in the filming of a TV program about the crash. Locals are somewhat used to camera crews in town, as media interest in the incident never wanes for long. The people of this community have done their best to turn the events of 1965 into a positive.
Once again, I started this back when I was 10 years old in 1959, so this year's going to be 58 years of research. Why do this? Well, I guess it's just the fact that I'm continuing to be curious. I'm still learning more and more about the phenomena out there. I've learned that this is a very strange world, and there's a lot of ongoing things out there that we have yet to understand. And I guess I'm always hopeful that that next phone call might come in on my hotline, or the next email I get might be the case that once and for all gives us the evidence that will prove that at least one of these phenomena really do exist.
But countless questions remain. What fell near Kecksburg, and what does the United States government know about it? What was unleashed on this region in 1973, and did it ever really stop? How do we talk about phenomena that are continuously shifting, always just out of reach? How do we describe the apparition already disappearing in the mist? It seems that the rolling slopes of the hills, the silent presence of the Chestnut Ridge itself, is the only thing permanent. That, and the persistence of human curiosity.